As an IT security professional, you need to understand the laws and the regulations that are in the area that your company is in and that you need to adhere to, because they have a huge impact on your work. On the list here, you can see we have 6 different types of laws or regulations. The top 4 I would know stone cold for the certification. The bottom 2 may or may not show up, but just in case, know them. If not for your exam, you might need to know them for your job. To begin with, we have criminal law, and that is the type of law where most cybercrimes fall under. With criminal law, society is the victim, and the proof in those cases must be beyond a reasonable doubt. And the punishment, if convicted, can range all the way from financial fines through incarceration and finally death penalty. And the sentencing here is to punish and deter. And I have had some pushback from my students who say, yeah, but hacking, death penalty, that doesn't really make any sense. And I would agree in most cases. If they steal social security numbers or credit card numbers, or they have a DDoS attack and the server's down, sure, that's not something that we use the death penalty for. But what if they caused a nuclear power plant to melt down and 1 million people die, or they crashed an airplane? In that case, maybe death penalty would be on the table, but in most cases, it is not. Either way, for criminal law, society, beyond a reasonable doubt are keywords, punish and deter, which then brings us to civil law. That will also sometimes be referred to as tort law. And here it is no longer society that is the victim. It can be individuals, groups, or organizations. And in these cases, proof must be the majority of the proof. Again, keyword, majority. You may also hear of this as the preponderance of proof. It is more likely than not. And here the punishment are financial fines, and they are there to compensate the victim or the victims. Administrative law or regulatory law is laws that are enacted by government agencies. In the US, that could be FDA laws and rules, HIPAA, FAA, and things like that. And then finally, the last one that I am sure is going to be on the exam is private regulations. We've talked about the PCI DSS standard. Anyone who wants to issue credit cards needs to adhere to that. If they don't, they can lose their right to issue credit cards. And the companies that are in charge of this, they are pretty strict about enforcing the rules because first off, they want to make sure that credit cards are seen as safe. And secondly, they don't want any interference from the US government. If they do a good enough job, then there probably won't be interference. And the last 2 here, customary law and religious law, if you are in a place where this is something that is used, you obviously need to know it so you can adhere to it. Customary law focuses on personal conduct and patterns of behavior, and it is founded in the traditions and the customs of that area or that region. And then religious law, again, it's a religious belief in a certain area or a certain region, and most often they include a code of ethics and morality that are required to be upheld. Since knowing the laws, the regulations, and the rules in your area is part of your job, understand very clearly which laws, rules, and regulations you need to adhere to in the area and the country you're in so you can make sure you do the best job possible. And that probably is a good segue for us to look at liability, due diligence, due care, and negligence. We have briefly touched on liability before. Remember, that's senior leadership being ultimately liable. But just because they are ultimately liable does not mean that you are not liable as well. And whether you're liable or not really depends on your due care. If something happens and you were supposed to have done something that could have fixed it, or it is your job to make sure it doesn't happen, if you have done your job right, you have researched the options, you have given recommendations to senior management, and they chose not to follow them, well then you have done your due diligence and your due care, and they are liable. But if it was your job to do something, let's say secure a web server, and you didn't do it, and you didn't research it, you just pushed it out there, well then you didn't do your due diligence, you did not do your due care, you are liable. And I have had a good deal of students that have problems differentiating due diligence and due care. So I'm going to go a little more in depth here so you are very clear on what is due diligence and what is due care. Very oversimplified, Due diligence is the research, the preparing, all the practical stuff you do before you implement something. Then due care is the implementation, and then the monitoring and confirming that everything is working how it should is also due diligence. Many also use the short mnemonic due care, DC, as due correct. You're fixing something. Due diligence, DD, due detect. You are detecting something is wrong, you're finding a way to fix it, and then you fix it with due care. DC, due correct. DD, due detect. Let's say we do a risk assessment or an audit. All of the practical stuff we do before we do the actual assessment or the actual audit is due diligence. It is everything that we do to prepare. We make sure we have the right people allocated, we have the right resources, the right money, we have the time we need. All that is due diligence. Now, the actual risk assessment or audit is due care. We're acting on our research, we're doing the work. After we are done, then presenting the risk report, the audit report, or whatever it is we have, that is due diligence. And then, regardless if it is the risk assessment or the audit, it is likely there will be some actionable items that we need to work on. Let's say we found some security vulnerabilities on some of our servers. Well, then again, how we're going to fix that would be due diligence, the actual fixes, due care. And it is always an ongoing effort. It's not something we're done with because risk assessment is going forever. There's always things we need to fix. See it as a cycle. Due diligence, due care. Due diligence, due care. We research, we fix. Then after the fix, then we make sure everything's working, then we research some more. I hope for you that has made due diligence and due care slightly clearer. Which then brings us to negligence. And negligence is the opposite of due care. And I mentioned this earlier. If you have a system that is under your responsibility and you did your due care, then you're most likely not liable. But if you chose to ignore the threat, you did nothing, then you are most likely liable. And that is negligence or gross negligence.